Well, greetings, fellow YouTubers. It's a fairly nice day in Toronto right now, considering it's February 22nd, so I decided why not take it outside. And I've never done this before, so this is a kind of a busy area, so perhaps someone might pass by. That'll be funny. Then I'll have to be like, oh, don't mind me, I'm just taking a video here. So anyways, in this video I'm going to talk about wandering alone in Guatemala City, which is a far sketchier place than Toronto. I mean, Toronto has its problems, but Guatemala City is a bit sketchier. So I also met some interesting characters there. Now, I previously spent time in Peru, Argentina, Brazil, before I went back to Canada. This would have been back in 2012. But I don't think it's necessary to tell these stories in a chronological order. I don't think putting it all in chronological order is so important. I mean, each story exists in its own world, in its own place, and in its own headspace. So I traveled to Guatemala in September 2012 in order to continue studying Spanish, and I registered with a Spanish school in the mountain town of Xela, also known as Quetzaltenango. But I was also in Guatemala because I still had an appetite for adventure at that time. So by coincidence, my flight arrived in Guatemala City on the 15th of September, which happens to be Guatemala's Independence Day. Having an entire afternoon and nothing to do, it would be a shame not to see what was happening in town. And the man who managed the guest house, named Alberto, he called me a taxi, and it took me to the center of the city, about 15 minutes away. I was able to withdraw some cash from an ATM, which is always a relieving feeling. You know, that's a great moment when you get to a foreign country and you actually get cash from an ATM, because now you're enabled, right? You actually have some cash. So yeah, that's when you really arrive in a country, is not when you get to the airport, but when you get cash out of the ATM. So downtown Guatemala City, how did it look? It looked pretty kind of dirty, a lot of dirty, dilapidated buildings. And I don't mean no disrespect to Guatemala or to Guatemalans. They're actually really nice people. I just felt the city is kind of sketchy. That's not uncommon sometimes when you're traveling in Latin American cities in developing countries. So when I was walking down the street, actually a heavy chunk of stucco or concrete fell from a ledge, and it fell about 12 feet and then broke into pieces right there on the sidewalk on the other side of the street. So, you know, no one was injured, but yeah, it could have knocked you out. It could have caused a concussion. So just as I'd seen in a place like Lima, Peru, and in so many other developing countries, walls everywhere. You know, barbed wire on top, or shards of glass. You stick the shards of glass in the cement. That's a cheaper option, right? To just do the glass and the cement, save money that way. Meanwhile, because it's Independence Day, crowds of thousands are gathering, and there are all these marching bands, and they're all adolescents. They're all teenagers. And they're playing this military-style music, which emphasized the smashing of snare drums and cymbals. It was deafening. All around, the colors are red, white, and blue banners all over. I didn't do my homework on why they have the red, white, and blue. I don't know. That's not necessarily their national colors, but you know, it looked very European. I spent about 5 hours wandering the area near Centro Cívico, the main plaza, and there were so many revelers here that finding a place to sit was challenging. Yet, only a few blocks away from this plaza, everything was quiet. And the sidewalks were pretty narrow, and there was a lack of open public space. You know, you notice this sometimes in Latin American cities. There's not really too much open space to just hang out and chill. So maybe in Toronto, we're a bit blessed. We have a bit more green space, a bit more public parks. So wandering around Guatemala City felt kind of unwelcoming. Eventually, I did find a park, sat down on a bench, and at that time, a man in sunglasses with an attractive woman sitting next to him, who appeared to be his girlfriend, they were just relaxing there on another bench, not far away from me, and the man spoke to me, and he said, "Hey friend, where are you from?" And I said, "Well, I'm from Canada." And he asked me, "What are you doing, man?" And I said, "I'm just chilling." And this guy seemed pretty friendly, and so I asked him what his name was. And he said, "I'm nobody, man. I'm nobody." So he smiled as he spoke, and it was as if he was kind of telling a joke. I wasn't sure. His girlfriend didn't react to anything he was saying. I wondered what he meant by saying that he was nobody. So I returned to the central square, and I made my way through the crowds, People are posing for photos next to soldiers in green uniforms who guarded pieces of artillery. The artillery was for the public. Come, see, touch, pose for photos. These guns are the power of the state, which is looking after you, humble citizens. Come, see, bask in the glow of the guns. Garbage littered the pavement. The music and the commotion continued. I became kind of bored, then a little nervous. I was the only white person in a sea of tan-skinned Guatemalans. This is the dilemma of the traveler. There's not actually anything for you to do here. You are a ghost. You are a phantom. And I was starting to realize, well, when the sun was starting to go down, okay, time to go. So I got in a taxi, and I started talking with the taxi driver. He was also pretty friendly, and I was starting to realize that Guatemalans are an unusually friendly and warm people despite enduring decades of genocide and extreme poverty. So I conversed with the driver, and I asked him whether he considered Guatemala to be a part of North America or South America, and he said obviously North America, and it is, obviously. Kind of a silly question, but I was wondering if he might have said something else. I mean, after all, it didn't really feel like North America. The surroundings reminded me more of Peru, including the physical appearance of the people. And they didn't look like Colombians, Brazilians, or Argentinians. They seemed to be mostly of an indigenous background, though I know it's a slippery slope and it's an impossible task, and also somewhat arrogant to define who is a mestizo and who is an indigenous person or an Indian, considering that Africans and Europeans have been in the Americas for over 500 years now, and quite a lot of mixing between the races has taken place. So, at 7:30 the next morning, Alberto from the hostel drove me to the Alamo station where buses departed for the town of Xela, where my Spanish school was. And he said that, that the bus was supposed to leave at 8 o'clock, and, but being Sunday, everything was locked up and the streets were empty. And when we arrived, the station was actually closed. And Alberto, he said to me, oh, I guess there's no early bus today because of the holiday. Apparently some I guess, well, yeah, Independence Day weekend. So he said, oh, just wait a few hours. So, sometimes that's how it rolls in developing countries. It's like, oh, today's a holiday, so, things are on a slower time scale. Things are on not quite such a punctual time scale. So I said, all right, okay. And Alberto, he drove off. I mean, I wasn't too happy about this mix-up, but it wouldn't make sense for me to go back to the guest house. So being a Sunday and not really, being deserted, the streets are deserted, there's no one around, except for this one family waiting outside the station. And they told me that the bus wouldn't leave until 10:30 in the morning. So that meant I had 3 hours to kill. So I certainly wasn't going to kill the time here. It's a little sketchy, so I just didn't feel too safe. So I went down the block to a very busy thoroughfare, and I followed the street for a few minutes, and I came to a Wendy's restaurant, which, to my relief, was open. And by the way, there are plenty of American fast food joints in Latin America. Sometimes it even seems like they have more than what Canada has. But, to give you an example, in San Jose, Costa Rica, it's just packed with so many American fast food restaurants, and it's kind of disgusting. And indeed, there's a lot of fat people in these countries. Not everywhere. I mean, a lot of people in these poor countries are poor and aren't fed as well. But there's a lot of fat people too. And anyways, I ordered a Coke at the Wendy's just so I could sit there and pass the time. And I don't even like soda. It's not so great to drink that, but it felt safer than hanging out on the street with my 2 full bags, that anyone could see. So I chatted with the young security guard, and he had a pistol, right there that fairly right. I don't think he had it in his. Was he carrying it? I don't know. He had it like at hand, let's say. So that was kind of cool, and he was pretty friendly. Like, all Guatemalans are pretty friendly people. Even maybe the criminals are friendly too. Maybe, I don't know. But so I was chatting with him. He was a pretty short guy, but then again, most Guatemalans are definitely shorter people. He, however, spoke very good English. So he told me, I lived in the USA for 6 months, North Carolina. This is him talking. He's telling me, oh, I lived in North Carolina. Everything's expensive in the States. I spent so much money there, he said, grinning and then kind of shaking his head, like, how could I have spent that much money? And then he went on, he said, and people in the USA often look at me like I'm a Mexican. So it was evident by the way he spoke that, he didn't think too highly of the Mexicans. So I thought that was kind of funny that Guatemalans look down on Mexicans. And then I told him, I said, oh, I'm taking the bus to Quetzaltenango in a little while, and I'm going to study Spanish there. And then he said, oh, that's my hometown. So that was kind of nice. And then it was time for me to go back to the station. So later, taking this bus journey to Shayla, I would later get to know this town. And it was a pretty dreary place, I got to tell you. Not the warmer, more tropical setting I had in mind. In fact, one of my best pieces of advice to tell you as a traveler, if you're traveling around the world, is pay attention to the altitude. Always look up the altitude when you're going somewhere. That's a lot more important in affecting the climate than latitude is. Because being close to the ocean or being far away from the ocean, up or down, that's really going to affect the climate a lot more. So I was in kind of a chilly place, to be honest. And in that town, I'd also get to know what it was like to live with a common Guatemalan family in their common, humble dwelling. For one, I can tell you there was no heating there. But more to my interest, I'd get to know a very lively man, Carlos, my Spanish instructor, who taught me privately. He had some very strange tales to tell me, inexplicable stories which are creepy. But that's all I have to say for now. Hasta luego, amigos.